Episode of the SDSU podcast is sponsored by Marz Energy Cream, the first ever topical energy delivery product. Think energy drink, but it's a lotion. It contains a proprietary blend of natural ingredients, including caffeine, taurine, and B vitamins, to provide an energizing boost. And unlike traditional energy drinks and gels, Marz Energy Cream is sugar-free, contains no artificial flavors, colors, or preservatives. If you want to try it out, go to marzenergydrinkcream.com and use the code Andre, spelled ANDRE, at checkout to receive 15% off a purchase of a 50 milliliter tube. You are listening to the SDSU podcast presented by the East Village Times with your hosts Andre Hagberdian and Paul Garrison. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of the SDSU podcast. I'm your host, Andre Hagberdian, joined as always by Mr. Paul Garrison. How you doing, Paul?
Brother, I am doing A-okay, doing really, really well. We are in go season, man. Basketball, football, of course. There's so much going on, and trying to keep up with it, man. It is a lot, but it is good work, and happy to, talk with you, get a little podcast going, brother. How are you?
I'm doing good too. It is a busy time. Anytime the football and basketball overlaps, it is a lot. Fortunately, we have Chris Spearing with us this year, doing a lot of the basketball heavy lifting, right? Covering games, right? Recaps, things like that.
Absolutely.
I can chip in and attend, weekly press conferences. I was at Viejas today, Wednesday, Brian Dutcher and Reese Waters speaking. So, it's a tag team effort. You're headed up to Fort Collins for the Colorado State game, obviously. But before we get into that, talk about Utah State. It was a second home loss in a row for San Diego State in double overtime. They've lost 6 out of 7 after winning their first 2 games. Bowl eligibility is in dire straits, having to win all 3 games just to be eligible, and then, see if there's a game for you that you can get invited to, because being bowl eligible doesn't necessarily guarantee you a spot in a bowl game or an invitation to a bowl game. So what were your quick takeaways from that game, and before we get into positional grades?
Quick takeaway is I thought the game was like the opposite of what you would expect. You have, one quarterback with 39 passing attempts, and you'd say, okay, that's going to be Utah State. You have one team that had 208 yards rushing, not their net, but their gain. You say, okay, that's going to be San Diego State. And, it turned out to be the opposite. So I thought that opposite kind of world was interesting, but I think, there was a sense of urgency, I think defensively the whole game. Offense, I think kind of started showing that towards the end, which is crazy considering, what they did the week before. But let's jump into it.
They've lost 3 games by double digits pretty badly. UCLA, Oregon State, Air Force. All the other 6 games have been 1-score games. And they're 3-3, a couple plays here and there. You could be 6-0 in those games. A couple plays here and there, you could be 0-6. So The margin of error per game, when you play a 1-score game, could go either way. And it's like they're 3-3 in those 6 games, but they could, it could easily go one way or the other. Maybe the Idaho State game and the Ohio game, they had double-digit leads in both of those until the end. So you could say those weren't really up in the air, but at least the last 4 have been for sure. Quarterback, what was your grade for Jalen Maiden?
Oh man, I would love to give him an A. Probably deserves an A, given how poorly the running game played. But I think that the 2 plays that he did not make, which was throwing to Mark Redmond in the end zone, wide open, read the play correctly, found the receiver. If there was a throw that you could have substituted any of his teammates in and they could have made that throw, that's the one. And to miss that in that situation, and at least give them a shot to win. Obviously, you never know what, Utah State's going to do on the backside of it. Was just huge. And then in the overtime with the one interception that he threw that sealed the game, they had a bunch formation out wide, three defenders there, and two of the defenders went short. Nobody really went deep. And if he sees that, and instead of throwing the short pass, he throws the deep one, they would have had a shot for a 2-point conversion and to keep everything going. So because just on those huge misses, I'm going to go B minus. However, he played really well. He played really well. I think if anything, you're looking at it from a coaching perspective, and you're like, well, if it's just weird. Like if your running game is not going, like it was not going against Utah State, the week before it was like, and maybe that's the adjustment. Is the week before, Coach Lindley said that the passing game wasn't going, so he relied on the run more. And this week it was like he still kept going back to that bread and butter of the run, even in the second overtime, running 3 straight times and only giving Maiden one time to be able to try to do something. So overall, though, I think it was a good game, and clearly a game that ends in overtime maybe deserved better.
I'm gonna go B plus only because I think when you factor in some of those drops,
that's another good point. Yep, that's a great point.
There was, I think, Balin Brooks. He's a very promising wide receiver, but he had 2 major drops on third down. One would have given them a first down inside the 5, and he might have actually scored a touchdown if he caught the ball, because he had an angle to the end zone. And that was the drive, I believe, Jack Browning missed the field goal.
You're right.
So that's the 7-point difference right there. And then another one he dropped that was also on third and long would have given them a first down. Think about Jalen's numbers if you factor those in, and there were a couple other drops too. The Redmond miss that would have won the game was definitely a big one. At the interception, I did go back and look at that play. I do see Penny streaking open, and that the safety did come up. I wonder though, with the timing of it, whether the safety saw Maiden throw or the throw to the outside, and that's why it looked like Penny was more open. But it's tough to say. So I don't know necessarily if he throws it to Penny, whether that safety would have broke on the ball or not. But definitely the one to Redmond was a big miss. He didn't run. He only ran, 5 times for 6 yards. He lost 11 on sacks, so he was a -5. It's the first time probably in like 6 or 7 games where he didn't pick up a bunch of yards running, or he'd lead the team in rushing. So, that was probably not the focal point of this game, because he did throw 39 times. What about running backs? What did you see there?
I think that a D minus. I almost want to give them an F. They were bad, I thought. It didn't make guys miss. It was just weird. They get a 62-yard run. Great job. Burst through there, got the hole, hit it, attacked it hard. That was the reason they got their offensive line, opened it up. Fantastic. They scored a touchdown off that drive, right? Because it's the big plays that they've been lacking, big plays that they're needing. They scored a touchdown. But then, like every single quarter, you would look up, and that was 62 yards, and they had 60 total yards in the quarter rushing the ball, and then it was like 70, and then 77, and then there was one 25-yard gain by Keenan Christian, and they needed to combine what they did last week against Nevada, where they were getting 3 yards a carry, and then the 62-yard run, and they have an A day, and they win the game, and they win. But the fact that it was so feast or famine, you'd almost honestly, given how the game went, you would have taken the game against Nevada, where they were getting 3 yards but no big plays, versus the one big play that Sutton ends up getting. They did participate in the receiving game. So if I guess the backs would have to get a little higher than a D. Let's move it up to a C minus. But I mean, just talking about running the ball, then you get into the receiving game, and obviously Christian has 8 catches, scores a touchdown. And so I think from that perspective, they were really good. Martin Blake had a reception, big reception. So from that perspective, they were really good as receivers, but as running backs, left a lot to be desired. And you take away those 2 big runs that they got, it was like less than 1.5 yards a carry after that.
Yeah, I was just gonna do that math. So that was 87 yards on both carries at a 121. Pretty bad after
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I was gonna go B minus. Maybe you've convinced me to go C plus, only because you got to factor in the passing game, and Keenan Christian led them, with catches, receiving yards. Bucky Sutton's big run, although he got caught. They did things to help them win the game, not necessarily not running the ball well, but yeah, I'll go C plus. Wide receivers, I think this is where I'd go with a D. The drops, as we talked about, Breon Penny caught his first career touchdown, so that's something to be celebrated. And it was in the first overtime, but that was more like a miscommunication by the defense than it was him. He just kind of ran a go route to the end zone, and Maiden found him. Mekhi Shaw had 4 for 56, Penny 4 for 57. Josh Nicholson had 2 for 9. He had that one shovel pass in the second overtime that he tripped and didn't pick up any yardage, which is disappointing because it looked like he might have, if he could have made that one guy get by that one guy, he could have had a big play, at least the first down. So I thought they really hurt the offense with the drops and the lack of big plays.
Yeah, I think your grade is fine. I'll go C minus just because you already mentioned Balin Brooks. I think that the second one, obviously any drop you don't want, but the second one was particularly egregious only because it looked like a perfect pass to Mark Redmond.
Yeah.
And and again, I mean, I think it was Don or PJ. One of them had like a great shot of it, fully extended in his hands, and Redmond's like right there, and he's going to catch it at, eye level or whatever. And so, I mean, that's kind of like the double mistake where it's like, that's not the design of the offense. There's no design of any offense where they run, to the sticks and there's two guys standing right next to each other, right?
But we don't know. Maybe Mark Redmond ran the wrong route.
That's 100% true.
We don't know who was at fault there.
That's true. However, I've seen enough football to suggest that the true freshman is probably the guy who's at fault and not the upperclassman. So I'm gonna pin it there. And then obviously he didn't make the catch. If he makes the catch, everything's forgiven, and those things happen. But yeah, I didn't think it was great. Offensive line, it's a difficult one. They obviously finally had that big hole that they needed to be able to win the line of scrimmage, but then couldn't open up holes the rest of the game. And so, I think it was a D plus. I think that 76, I think his lack
Abdullah.
of thank you. Dean Abdullah, I think his lack of just physicality, I think is showing. There's definitely athleticism. It's not for a lack of like effort or anything like that, but he just is not very stout as you'd want as a guard. I think that they obviously it's one or the other. You pass or it goes both ways. But there was a couple of sacks. The way that the game went, I think Utah State won line of scrimmage.
Yeah, I agree with your grade. It kind of reminds me of in the post game press conference, Brady Hoke used the term "it's a broken record that we don't want to play."
Yeah.
Right, and I used that in my recap title that
Yeah.
it played, the broken record played. It seems like every week we're talking about this game. We're talking about this missed opportunities and these drops or bad pass for a touchdown and a missed block here and there. And after a while, that's just who they are at this point of the season. I don't necessarily see that changing. That's a sign of a team that's 3-6. We could talk about multiple plays in every game that could have switched it and turned them to a 6-3 team, but I think they are what their record says, and they played like a 3-6 team. And last but not least, on the offense, we got tight ends. Mark Redmond finally scored his first touchdown of the season since the first game where he had 2. Obviously, we talked about could have had a second one to win the game. Right. 5 catches, 44 yards, so not a ton of big catches. The touchdown was 11 yards. What grade did you give those guys?
Oh, bro, I'm going A minus. I think like what does his numbers look like differently if and again I'm putting it on Balin Brooks, that pass goes through, and Redmond gets that pass, you're up into the 70s. Uh, they make the touchdown. Now he has two touchdowns, and he did what he was supposed to do. It's just what it is. I mean, I don't think they have a lot of different paths to success, and their path to success always includes the tight ends playing well and getting involved in every facet of the game. Maybe it's a little high, but just to emphasize, I thought that they played well. Obviously, like to see more in the running game. We talk about all of those kinds of things, and then I think the last thing that he deserves in A4 was how he handled himself at the press conference this week. I thought that his response about just people, I guess, kind of bagging on his head coach and saying, like, we're not really listening to that because nobody outside sees the work that we do, that we see from him. There has been an accusation thrown at Hoke because his public persona is not as engaged as it was the first time he was here. And ever since Ted Tollner, who was the former USC head coach, came to San Diego State, and many people believe that Ted Tollner kind of retired on the job, that he just wanted, and he kind of did his swan song at San Diego State. People, I guess, have always been looking at like what happens when an older coach comes to state and kind of looking for that again. And there's been this thought that maybe that's where Hoke is at because he doesn't, he's just not as energetic or as engaged with trying to build the fan base and holding events and things like that you saw the first time he was there. And so, our experience has been going out to practice and the first coach on the field bringing out the dummies to work with the defensive line is the head coach. He's the guy who's physically lifting these and pulling them out. His energy going between different groups, not just spending time with the defensive line, but going to each group, getting engaged with actually the coaching of, special team drills or whatever it is. We've seen all those things. I think it's important for a person like Mark Redmond who knows more about football at this stage in his career than the vast majority of fans. And then, of course, being inside of the locker room, can speak with authority about Hoke. And so I thought being willing to do that, I don't think that there's a lot of players on the Aztecs who could do that and it would be appropriate. But I think Mark Redmond standing as, one of the top tight end recruits in the country, going to Washington, their most, pro kind of potential kind of guy among the seniors, I thought he just answered it well and let people know that, his coach is working incredibly hard and they respect him for all of those kinds of things, and thought it was needed.
So I'm going to give the tight ends a B minus only because just the running game and the blocking there was, as we talked about, was not great.
You're not factoring into your grade this week's press conference?
No, I've never done that.
You want to talk about like looking for a way to raise the grade, you know what
I mean? I'm looking for the quote because I wasn't able to make the press conference for the football on Tuesday. My real job, my day job that pays my bills, has precedence, so I wasn't able to make it. But he said something that other than his comment about, backing up Coach Hoke, but he said, I've been on a team where it hasn't been that great, meaning had a losing record. That's not something that you see from the guys on this team. And he was talking about like focused work ethic, continuing to stay together. That's not something that you see from guys on this team. They're still eager to go out there and eager to fight. That's the thing I'm most proud of with our team. I mean, he went to Washington, right? Washington had a losing record. I assume he's talking about Washington. Maybe he's talking about his high school days, but he's saying basically that I've been on losing teams where the focus and the concentration and the fight has gone, and it hasn't happened here. I think that's a bigger show of support for a head coach than anything you say about it directly. I think indirectly that's just a show of support. So I thought that was a good one.
No, absolutely. And I mean, as we've talked about before the Utah State game, as we're, kind of good segue into all of this, the question that is in front of this administration and this team, if San Diego State is not able to string 3 games together in a row and become bowl eligible, is do they have a better shot of turning it around in a year by keeping the staff who won 12 games a couple years ago and doing what Tulane did 2 years ago, where they were they had a bad season, stuck with their coach, then they go and they make the big jump with the current staff in place, or do they, risk what's happened to Colorado State, which, I mean, in your preview, just incredible amount of roster turnover that could just as easily happen at San Diego State. And then you're hoping that, like Colorado State is, you find this young quarterback, and as time goes on, when that person is a junior or a senior, like now you can really compete for a conference championships 4 or 5 years down the road. And that's a possibility. And I think that what we said is the culture in place. And it seemed like Mark Redmond, it addressed that and said these guys are working just as hard as if they, were competing for a conference champion, if they were winning. So I agree. It's a really, really powerful quote.
We can talk about this when we get to Colorado State preview about that roster turnover and what an example that might provide to what can happen to San Diego State. Moving to the D line, I'm going to give them an A.
Yeah.
I think maybe no other position probably has gotten worse grades all season on the defensive line. Maybe the offensive line has been.
They've lost up front at this point.
But I mean, the team overall had 5 sacks and 12 TFLs, but the 3 starting defensive linemen had 4.5 tackles for losses and 3 sacks.
Yeah.
2 sacks. And that includes Garrett Fountain, Tupu Alualu, and Daniel Opoco. They just made a lot of plays. They were not getting pushed around that they have all year. They were getting in the backfield, even if they weren't bringing the guy down. They were funneling to other guys. Zyrus had 3 sacks. Cooper McDonald had a tackle, 1.5 TFLs. A bunch of other guys made plays, and the defensive line was a big part of that. And so for 1 week, at least this week, you could say that they were the stars of the defense.
I agree. And, I think I think that they've improved all year. And I thought, maybe in weeks past, especially after Air Force.
Yeah.
Where they just, they weren't competitive. I mean, that's the best way to say it. It doesn't mean that they, and again, I mean, that's the conversation, right? Where I go into the press conference after at Air Force and, little room and Garrett Fountain's in there. And I say, hey, man, how do you keep everybody together? And he goes, I don't know. The seniors, we got to go look in the mirror and we got to be better. Because he, you leave a game like that and it's just like, wow, like they're, and so I think he knew that at that time. And to their credit, they responded. And I don't know that statistically it showed up in Hawaii. Statistically, it showed up in Nevada. But they were disruptive and they were all the things that, you kind of would hope and think that maybe they could be this whole year. Just because, they're more athletic than they are big. And so the stunting and I think as you're starting to turn your idea to next year a little bit, as it gets late in the season, obviously 2 starters are going to be gone from a defensive line that has until this week not gotten A's. But at the same time, Tupu Alualu, I think, has turned into their best defensive lineman as he's gotten used to the Division I level. I think he's improved every week. And I think it bodes well that of the three, he's the one who presumably is coming back. And so I think it really sets up for, some confidence building, and they're going to need to duplicate that performance, I think, this upcoming week, because I think, this is a good offense that depending on how San Diego State's offense is going to be, they got to limit them to the points that they score to be able to keep the game within reach for their offense.
You don't think Garrett Fountain is coming back next year?
If he's given the opportunity, but I was under the impression that he already is using his.
No, this is his 4th year.
Oh, then they would be lucky to have him back. I just, in my mind, so it's only Opoko who has the COVID year. Oh, great. Okay, so then they would be really fortunate to have Garrett Fountain come back. I thought he was out of eligibility, but I mean,
No, I mean, he redshirted 2019, and then 2020, 21, 22, 23. Next year would be his 5th year, the COVID year.
The COVID year, great. That they would be. He's been their best defensive lineman the whole season, and Olu has developed into their best defensive lineman now, I believe. But that their prospects of having a really good defensive line, because I think Henderson, Brady Nasser, Dom Oliver, they think they've all started to show that they could be pretty good. So that's positive. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because I was mistaken. I thought he was.
Yeah, Wyatt Drager also had a TFL, a backup defensive title. So they had 5.5 TFLs for the defensive line. All right, linebacker, what do you got there?
I don't know how you put the right grade, but the grade that I would want to give is a television camera. I need an icon. Zayas Ruseu is a reason to show up and watch the Aztecs play.
Mm-hmm.
Like, did you see PJ's picture of the sack that he got? It was, oh my goodness. 3 sacks. It's just, it's for a city that Junior Seau made loving attacking linebackers, like that's what we in San Diego love to watch. He's a must watch. He was great. I think they deserve an A for that. Cody Moon being able to get back into the starting lineup, 13 sacks. I thought he was terrific.
Tackles.
Beg your pardon. Yeah, that would be a really good game.
That would
be a monster game. But I thought they were really good. But I think Zyrus is started obviously halfway through the year last year, and I thought that he was fine, but he's really developing into a star.
Yeah, I always remember when we had Michael Shawcroft on after the season, and we asked him about the linebackers and the things he said about Zyrus, how it wasn't just like his physical talents, but like his instincts and how he picked up the playbook so well, which is part of the reason why he surpassed Vi Cajo as the middle linebacker. So yeah, I mean, he's pretty much, I mean, he leads the team in pretty much all the major categories: tackles, TFL, sacks, forced fumbles, fumble recoveries. Surprised he doesn't have an interception in there to really round out the stat sheet. But yeah, I thought Cody Moon starting and getting 13 tackles, his best games were game 1 and game 9, right? And you wonder where he was in between. And you wonder whether now he's supplanted, Vi Cajo and some of the other people as a starting will. And then if we can see kind of what we saw from him last year at New Mexico, as 104 tackles on the season or something like that.
Right. No, I think it's really good. And I will say the only part of it that is, as far as just pure entertainment of watching defense, if you enjoy that, it would have been fun to have watched Patrick McMorris and Zyrus like next to each other, and just how they would have played off of each other and done all that. That would have been a lot of fun.
Did you give a grade for the linebackers?
I said they're must watch. I gave them a TV icon. No, an A, full A.
I was gonna go A-, B+, only because I didn't think they played as well as a defensive line, and I didn't want to give the same
Got it.
grade. But I'll go with an A minus.
All right.
Corners. Basically, they're down
Corners.
to three. Basically, they're down to three, right?
Yep.
So not a lot as depth and guys playing a lot more snaps.
Yeah, again, I think a lot of this stuff, goes a little bit on a curve, obviously, as we've talked about over and over again. I just think that some of the big pass that they gave up is eh, they got to have their corners be able to be locked down, and it's hard to be able to be like, okay, you didn't get this one play, so I'm going to give them a C plus, and it's probably objectively maybe a little bit better, but there's not a big margin for errors we've discussed, and they allowed a couple of plays to get over them, and I think that really stopped what could have been another really dominant performance.
Terrell Vaughn, Jalen Royals, there were two guys that came in as two of the best receivers in the league, in the country. They both had 8 catches, around 90 yards. Each had a big touchdown. Up until the 50-yard play, they had kept Royals to 24 yards on 5 catches. Really good job. And then you give up a 150-yarder, and it kind of gets thrown out the window. So I was going to go with C. C plus, I think it's in line there. And then safeties. I thought the safeties played really well. I'm going to go with a B.
Overtime?
What's that?
I would say until overtime.
Yeah, that's the thing.
That was the hard part for me.
Josh Hunter played really well. JD Coffey was good until the targeting. Sedarius Barfield forced a fumble. I thought they were pretty good. I went with a B plus, but in overtime, it just seems like everything went out the window on both possessions.
Yeah. I can get that. I'm gonna stick with a B minus. I did think that the fourth fumble, if that thing doesn't go out of bounds, that's going to be the turnover that they've been looking for the last couple of games. But it's how the ball bounces. I do think that Josh Hunter, I thought he was played as well as they've had a Warrior safety play all season. Obviously, Deshaun McEwen and his pick 6 against Hawaii is going to be the biggest play. There were other opportunities in that game that they didn't quite go as well as they needed to, but Hunter led. Well, I'm sorry, Hunter was second on the team in tackles, but I thought his best plays were not the ones that he made. There was a couple of times where he got into the backfield and he forced Utah State to go back inside, and other people cleaned him up, but it was because he was reacting to an instinctual play that Hunter made. He still continues to do everything that everyone said he was, as being like, a great open field tackler. So I thought he really solidified that position. He's still, I think he's better tackling and getting involved in the run game than in coverage. And that's been the bugaboo for that position. But you're not that's the challenge of what they asked that position to do. I do remember getting off the phone with his high school head coach, and I said, "Hey coach, hope we can do this again soon." He goes, "Oh, you will. You'll call me again." I go, "I will," and he goes, "Oh yeah, you're gonna call me in a couple of years because I told you, because when I talked to Brady, I said he's gonna play early for you, and you're gonna call me back, so I can tell you I told you so." That's what he told me while he was, still hadn't even been to San Diego State yet at all. And, tend to put stock in guys who have won and been around football as long as that. And so at least for the last couple of games, I thought that Josh Hunter has been really, really good and, living up to maybe some of the hype, honestly, that I created, if I'm being honest. But
from your clickbait title article. We've come a long way with
Hey, bro.
Oh man, too funny.
Completely.
Let's go to special teams. A lot to talk about here.
I love that they're sticking with Jack Browning. I love that they're doing that. But I remember a few years ago when Matt Ariza started to do all three phases, and they took punting away from him amazingly because he was their best field goal kicker. Because they had Heckling, Brendan, guy from USD who transferred over, and he did
No,
a great.
Tanner Coolgene.
Is that who it was?
Yeah.
Okay, I got the wrong punter.
I remember that because he's half Armenian and I knew his brother.
Awesome. Yeah, yeah. No, I'm doing it off of memory. Anyway, and so they took it away from him. And so I've just been wondering like when that could happen to Browning. He's missing a lot of kicks, man. And
Yeah.
I don't know what Gabe Placencia is not doing in practice to be able to at least get that shot. And honestly, like with the weather that it's supposed to be up in Fort Collins, going on the road, I don't know that this is the week to do it. I think the week if you were going to do it was last week, and so I guess they're gonna keep going with Browning, and then there's the two fake kicks. You know, I thought it was just interesting, like Brady's description post game where he said what they did is they had that guy lined up way outside like they normally do, and then he came down, and it's just asking the question like, okay, well, when did the staff recognize that?
Why not call a timeout?
100%, like that, like if and if it's after the fact that you go and you say, hey Doug Deacon, what happened, and then he tells you, it's kind of like, well, that's what the staff has to do. They have to see that they've called a play that's not going to work and save the team from that play ever happening. So like
Yeah.
if it's well designed, and I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things where I'm not saying that like I'm certainly not saying that like every coach would be able to see it that quickly and do that, but like coaches win or lose, and in that moment, the winning play was calling a timeout because of the way Colorado State was set up. Beg your pardon, Utah State. Colorado State's coming. I thought that was interesting. And then the other one where again, it's one of the closest you'll ever get to even only because he's an older player, team captain. But it certainly sounded like Jack Browning made a mistake and kind of took that punt on his own. But again, it begs the question, why was that an option at that point of the game? Where you have a conversation, Doug Deacon does, and says, hey, like, yes, this is what happens if it's the third quarter, if it's whatever, but like now is not the time.
He said it was a miscommunication. We thought we had the look we wanted, but it wasn't quite there. Another point about, well, that should be something you're 100% sure about. So what was gone in the preparation and the coaching during the week about what that look was? Another thing about, okay, well, should the coach call timeout when he realizes that the player didn't actually see the right look? So yeah, both of those definitely. Stadium State's been very good and very successful with fake kicks over the last 3 years. And not all of them are going to work out. And I'm not against being aggressive.
No.
But sometimes you're aggressive, you get the look, and somebody just makes a great play. You tip your hat. But in both of these cases, it seemed like the ball should have never been snapped into those fakes. And they weren't. And that's why they didn't work. They weren't even close. So,
right.
Fortunate.
And it's interesting because I think the last time when we talked about Nevada, there was so much that was happening, and the whole game in the totality, whenever you have, the first shutout in my lifetime at a home game, like it just didn't feel like the right place to talk about it. But I thought against Nevada, as far as his game management, Brady Hoke was terrific, with the exception of the speed at which the last drive went at. I think that pace of that should have been a little bit better. But I thought it was the opposite this week. I thought that they put him into positions that didn't help their cause. The flip side of all of that is, the team responded. They didn't give up a touchdown. Those things that thought that it was going to be like it's going to kill them ended up not killing them.
Yeah.
And so I thought in an ironic way, as we're looking for signs of like where is this team, that's been one of the hallmarks is there is Brady Hoke has been able to be aggressive. Just those punts and all those kinds of things because he can depend on his team to respond even if he puts them in a bad spot. I tried to make the point in the article that I wrote that interestingly enough, I think it showed that there's still a fight. They still have the competitiveness because a team that didn't have those things when their coaching staff doesn't handle them perfectly folds. And they didn't. So it was really interesting. But I thought Mekhi Shaw was really good on punt returns. A penalty negated what would have been a bigger one, even more of a gain. I still think that if they're limiting, like I know that they want to figure out ways to get all of their running backs touches, Sheldon Canley. But all of the opportunities that Keenan Christian was not getting because the kickers could cut punt, like they've been there the last couple of games and these guys can't. And it's like you need something from special teams. And I still think Keenan Christian is your best chance of getting that. And so you haven't seen that kind of savvy to be able to really like make something about it. And so, obviously Sheldon Canley proved me wrong, shut me up. But I thought that those opportunities should still be going to Keenan Christian, in my opinion, just because, I think he's still relatively new at it. And, if he's not carrying the ball as much because you're giving it to Lucky Sutton, like you need to get the ball in this guy's hands, as much as possible. I'm not going to hysterically tweet about it though. So that's good.
Yeah. I was going to give the special teams a D.
Yeah.
And the only reason it's probably not an F is because of Eric Butler's blocked punt.
That's it. Yeah, that's right.
Now it's his second blocked punt. He's tied, I think, for second most by a Aztec in a season.
Yeah.
He's tied for most block kicks in the country. So that's good. Now he got a little bit of help from the punter dropping a perfect snap, giving him time. But hey, you still got to put that effort in to get to the guy before he gets the kickoff. Obviously, it was a big play. It gave the offense the ball at near midfield instead of maybe backed up inside the 10, which allowed them to go down and tie the game and send it to overtime. But yeah, overall, this is one of the poorer special teams performances under Deke in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, which is interesting because, like you said, they had a block, and they were there. I think it's kind of funny. As we were leaving the stadium in Hawaii, our Uber didn't show up, and Eric Butler's dad, right? He happened to be there and was going in the same general area, so we shared an Uber going back. I was the photographer that day, as you were doing the recap, so I was on the field trying to pretend that I'm Don Marz, and I didn't get it. I was in perfect position to get the first block punt. And so Eric joked, he asked me, like whatever. Oh man, I did my best, but I didn't get it, and thought things around it. And he made this funny comment about, like, oh dude, you're my favorite photographer, that kind of thing. So then this week, Don got it perfect.
Oh yeah.
It's such a great shot. And so I sent him the picture and I'm like, dude, you're still your favorite photographer? Like, there's no chance. But Don really got it. And I think you have to tip your hat to a young safety who had a good game against Boise State, but for reasons we're not aware of, has not been able to, really get back into that warrior safety rotation kind of thing. But he's finding ways to still compete and contribute to the team. Should also point out that Max Garrison returned from injury, was cleared to be able to do that this past week. And, just has done what Max Garrison is kind of always seems to do, which is to make a football play. He leaps on the ball and, it doesn't ricochet away from him. He catches it. If he hadn't, there's a chance that ball would have rolled after the tip another 20 yards and it wouldn't have been what it
Yeah.
turned into, which was a game-changing play. So I thought both safeties, young safeties, and obviously the third one with Josh Hunter, living up to a lot of those conversations that we had about how good they were earlier.
Initially, they gave that blocked punt to Wyatt Drager, even though he was not in the vicinity. And I think even in my recap, I put Wyatt Drager just because at the end of game madness,
Well, you have to, yeah.
scramble to get to the press conference and finish a recap and submit it. I didn't necessarily watch the replay to see who it was. But then when I got home and I watched the replay and I saw Don's picture, I was like, okay, it's
Yeah,
definitely Butler.
yeah,
But I texted San Diego State media, be like, hey, the next day I was like, hey, I think Eric Butler was the one who got the block. They're like, oh yeah, we're on it, we're changing it. So, but yeah, it was there was enough evidence there with the Eric Butler. Moving to Fort Collins and Colorado State, you're making the trip. Don
yeah,
DeMars will be there as well.
yep, yep, yep.
It's gonna be cold, so pack warm. I believe it's gonna be cold, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Like 30
I think,
degrees.
I said, wow. Well, I haven't looked in a couple days, but it didn't seem it was quite that bad. But is it 30 degrees?
I don't know. When we were hanging out the other day, I thought Don looked it up.
Maybe. Yeah, the difference between, well, it's 36 right now.
Yeah, there you go.
They got a high of 56 and a low of 30 kickoff that they're predicting it to, well, I to be 51 and by the end of it to get down there. So yeah. So I'm hoping to be in the nice secured press box, and
Yeah.
Don will be the real one braving the weather. Lucky that he's willing to get up there and take all those pictures and to capture so much of this stuff. I think the game's interesting because I think the weather does change kind of the nature of the game. Colorado State likes to throw the ball all over the place. Does cold hands and all that kind of stuff start coming into play in some way? Flip side of it is San Diego State hasn't been able to run the ball in any sort of like fashion that would make you really just be crazy, respect us, kind of a thing. And so I think the game is going to come down to what it seems like a lot of Colorado State games come down to turnovers.
Yeah.
And so can San Diego State get those turnovers, and will the mistakes that have plagued them come up? A young QB going up against the 3-3-5, can Kurt Maddox dial up some things that is going to confuse, allow them to bring pressure? Can San Diego State take advantage of the aggressive play that Colorado State has and get some big plays of their own when they miss on the blitz, they miss on they go to the wrong side? I think with as fast and as good as their pass rush is, what does the screen game look like for San Diego State? I think that could be a big key, either to just keep the good pass rush home or to take advantage of that and get out in space. The spread is really, really close. And I think ultimately the spread's really, really close because nobody knows, what these teams are going to do. I mean, Colorado State for the first, 3.5 quarters against Colorado looked really good.
Yeah.
And yeah, Colorado has tanked since. And I think like if everything goes according to script, like they won't have beaten a team with a winning record the whole year. They still have had flashes of being really good. They still have a quarterback that's, we probably take in, I have no idea, but probably the first 5 rounds, that kind of thing. So a really good player. Colorado State was in control against them. And then, they fell apart late and allowed Colorado to come back and win that game, and they shouldn't have. And so the talent is there, but talk to me a little bit about this roster turnover.
Colorado State is an example for San Diego State administration and fans to look at where a coaching change, a big hire, a big name hire, offensive minded roster turnover isn't necessarily going to bring the immediate success that you think. Jay Norvell was the coach at Nevada in 2021. Nevada had what? Carson Strong,
That's right.
Romeo Dobbs, Cole Turner, Torrey Horton, who's now in Colorado State. Their offense was one of the best in the country. And then at the season ends, and it's a big shock. Norvell moves to
In
Fort
conference.
Collins
Yeah.
and takes like all his best players from Nevada with him. And they were 3-9 last year,
Yep.
and they're 3-6 this year. Although they've got a chance to end up at 6-6 because now they're playing three of the lesser teams in the conference, and it's weird to say that when San Diego State is one of those three teams, but by record they are.
There.
There's no sugarcoating that, and they're at the bottom of the conference this year. And so for Colorado State, they have three games that they could win to get back to 6-6. But anyway, it hasn't worked out for them offensively, defensively. Obviously, the offense has gone better this year, but that immediate success hasn't happened. Now you could look at UNLV and say they brought in a big coach, and at least through 9 games in season one, it has seemed to have the turnaround. But as you mentioned to me, I think offline the other day, they've got their two biggest games coming up this season. I think they play Wyoming and
Air Force.
Air Force. Yeah. So I mean, their great season could become even greater in 2 weeks, or it could basically become maybe a 7-5 okay bowl season, which is still good for them based on where they've been. But they're two examples. But at least Colorado State, I think I would have told you 2 years ago, as we sat here, or a year and a half ago, that Colorado State would become one of the better teams in the conference, just like Nevada was under Norvell. And it hasn't happened in 2 years, and maybe it'll happen next year. But they brought in, I think they have 19 guys that were on their 2021 roster still on the roster.
Mm-hmm.
And 12 of those are scholarship guys. So the other 7 are walk-ons. That's a lot of turnover. So far, it hasn't worked through 2 years for them.
Yeah. Last week in my there's so much there, man. Last week in my kind of analysis of Utah State, I wanted to look at some of the comments that was made. It was started by Kirk Morrison on the Darren Smith show on 760, and he basically said, "I just got done calling a Tulane game, and San Diego State should be like Tulane. I mean, Tulane was 2-10, and then they turn around, and so I thought that Tulane was an example of a team that was like really low and then had this great turnaround under a young coach or a new coach. And that wasn't the case at all. They have the same coach that actually decided to stick with them. And then they went to the heights that they're at now. And in line for, a back-to-back, group of 5 New Year's Six Bowl. So then I decided, well, let's go through all of them for 2014. And again, none of these are NIL. None of these are transfer portal ones. So there's a different conversation to be had. I say none of them, but the majority of them are not. When it comes to, what to do with the coaching staff, and again, all this stuff is fun to talk about. JD Wicker, who we got on here, obviously is the one who knows how deeply he's considering it, etc. Although when we talked to him, we gave him.
You think this is fun for him?
No, I do not. But I mean, we did give him. We asked the question: is he? Do you have confidence in Brady Hoke now and in the future? And so we gave him the opportunity to say he's my coach for next year, and he decided not to say that after the Nevada game. So here we are with all the conjecture, right? There's kind of 2 veins of thought with this. The coaches who have had immediate success in taking a team to the biggest bowls. One group is somebody who was in like their 4th year and they built the whole program. The other group is people who took over somebody else's team and went there to, like Scott Frost at UCF, Josh Heupel also at UCF, Brian Harsin at Boise State. But the difference with those teams is the roster stayed intact because those groups did not have the ability to transfer. And so they couldn't go anywhere, and they built they went. And so the idea that, again, people have different ideas. Is San Diego State so bad that they need to do what they did at Colorado State, and Colorado, which was get rid of everybody, and now you need to use 50 transfer portal spots, maybe find, a guy, either from a lower FBS school at an FCS school who actually could bring his whole team with him, like Norvell did from Nevada over to Colorado State, and you kind of start over. Or do you somehow bring in somebody who can keep the roster in place, which I don't know how you could guarantee that, short of keeping all the coordinators. And then begs the question, if you're doing that, why don't you just keep the head coach? And I don't know that you can guarantee that you're going to be able to keep all these guys to build off of the foundation that Rocky Long and then Hoke, I guess in that scenario has not messed up enough that, you still have something that you really feel like you can build on. And not knowing which of those two you think is the right answer, I think is like major. And so I think that it's just the last piece on, I'll move on from it. The last piece on it is, yes, you can have huge roster turnover and maybe even do really good, but the transfer portal has not been around long enough to know if you do that, and that will transfer to sustained success. Utah State, I think, is a really good example. Their current coach, they brought over from, I forget, and he brought a quarterback in. They beat San Diego State in the Mountain West Championship. Well, they had the same record 2 years later as
Arkansas State.
Arkansas State. Yeah, I was somewhere in that. I think that's right. Here they are 2 years later, and it did not provide them with the foundation. It was a flash in the pan, and now they're back to where they were before they hired this guy. And now he's having to do the same work that he would have had to do, which is you have to build a program from scratch. As great as Deion Sanders is, there's a real good shot they don't go to a bowl this year. Like, they're favored to not go to a bowl, not have a winning record. And as much as you want to say, okay, yeah, but they're going to keep bringing in transfers, I would find it hard to believe that that they're ever going to be able to bring in a transfer who's going to be better at being quarterback than his son is now. You have to start from a freshman and build them up into your system, just like he did with his son. So there's a lot of moving parts to it, a lot of those kinds of things. And if you have, senior guys saying, man, this guy's working hard, they're showing fight, it's a real big gamble to want to reset it, because I'm not really sure with the transfer portal the way that it is. I'm not really sure that you can keep the foundation of San Diego State intact and just have another coach lead the same mix of players that are there.
Yeah, it's probably depends on who they bring in. If it's somebody that's maybe someone that's been here over the last 15 years or within that tree, or if it's somebody completely outside of that, of any previous semblance of San Diego State.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and again, that's another great question. Like, every player who's here now was recruited by Hoke. So, like, who on the tree could they bring in? Maddox has been here the whole time.
Well, it could be somebody from the Rocky Long tree.
Right, but do those kids know that guy?
No.
That's what I mean. Like, why would they?
Same defense system. Obviously, the offensive side would be brand new depending on who the OC is. But yeah.
And that's what I mean. I don't know that would necessarily resonate, again, unless you're keeping the coordinators. And then if you're keeping the coordinators, it just begs it begs that question of, well, what are you actually accomplishing? What is your goal? We'll continue to see it, but yeah, looking forward to going up to Fort Collins. I really wanted to see that stadium. Obviously, since it's been the Snapdragon comparison. So I'm going to be looking forward to that. Obviously, it's Veterans Day, and there's going to be a pretty special flyover. And oddly enough, it seems like there's been a flyover at every single San Diego State game on the road this year. So it should be good, man.
Yeah, I mean, on the outside, you can look at 3 players for Colorado State that are, probably all conference first team, second team players. You got their defensive lineman, Muhammad Kamara, who's a big sack guy. So they're going to have to keep an eye on him and make sure he doesn't disrupt everything. You also got their tight end, Dallin Holker, and their wide receiver, Torrey Horton, who came over from Nevada. Those guys are going to be a handful. Holker is 6'5", so whoever matches up with him, whether it's an outside linebacker or a safety, really needs to make sure to keep him in check. But two things I want to kind of nuggets I want to throw out there. One of them is Marshawn Oxley. He's a redshirt freshman defensive end. He committed to San Diego State in August of 2021. I remember him because that was my first year covering the team and keeping up with the recruiting. I think I may have even DM'd him some questions for something, for an article, but he ended up decommitting and signed with Colorado State. So he's playing now. He's backing up Kamara. Has some sacks and TFLs. And then the other, factoid was both of their kickers are non-Americans. Their punter is Australian, Paddy Turner, but their kicker is from the UK. He's English, and he's 31 years old, married with 3 kids. He's the third, and he's not even the oldest player in college football. He's the third oldest player, which is pretty crazy. Like, who were the other 2 people that are older than him? But I thought that was really interesting. I wanted to point that out. I put that in my preview.
Yeah.
So I wanted to point it out here in case people don't read the preview and only listen to this. So, yeah, really interesting.
I agree. It's funny. I enjoy that nugget as well. Tron Johnson wrote a terrific article previewing the BYU game. And they have, I think it's Spencer Johnson, who's the oldest player in NCAAs. And he was born the year I graduated high school. And so it made me at least still feel a little bit young that there's players who are still playing college basketball who were, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So then, in editing that article and getting that one ready, then I edited yours and I was like, oh man, this guy's got Johnson beat by 5 years or 4 years or whatever it was. That's pretty incredible. It's pretty incredible. I think as we saw, and obviously no longer on the team, but some of the other players who've been older and kind of come back to college and done some of the things, it's pretty special. But I thought your preview was great. What they really reminded me of as I was reading it? They reminded me of the Padres. They got a lot of stars, man, but they're not very good at football. And it's interesting. It's just an interesting, like, that they could have so many, guys who are on a award watch list who have great numbers, but for whatever reason, it hasn't translated to success on the field.
Hopefully you guys are looking forward to the matchup, despite the fact that the team is, on a, losing 6 out of 7. They've still got games to play. They still have a shot at bowl eligibility. That means something to the players and the coaches, and they're obviously eager to get out there and maybe start a 3-game winning streak to end the season. So we'll see. The game is at 4:00 Pacific time on CBS Sports Network. Paul and Don, as we talked about, will be there. So have a safe trip, guys. And, we look forward to your coverage. Thanks again for listening, everybody. We appreciate all the likes, subscribes, follows, shares on all your favorite platforms. And we'll talk to you guys next time. You are listening to the SDSU podcast presented by the East Village Times with your hosts Andre Hagberdian and Paul Garrison. This episode of the SDSU podcast is sponsored by Marz Energy Cream, the first ever topical energy delivery product. Think energy drink, but it's a lotion. It contains a proprietary blend of natural ingredients, including caffeine, taurine, and B vitamins, to provide an energizing boost. And unlike traditional energy drinks and gels, Marz Energy Cream is sugar-free, contains no artificial flavors, colors, or preservatives. If you want to try it out, go to MarzEnergyDrinkCream.com and use the code Andre spelled ANDRE, at checkout to receive 15% off a purchase of a 50 milliliter tube.